Hello and welcome again to another Functional Friday. We are a little bit later in the day at 4 o'clock here instead of our normal time, which is 10:30. But you know what? You accommodate when you have the doctor that you really want to talk to and seek out. So joining me today is Dr. Ken Sharlin. He is in Springfield, Missouri, not too far from us. He was connected to me from Dr. Emily Hecker. And this is why I love this network that we are creating, is because one doctor is leading us to another doctor, and it's these conversations and these resources that we are able to bring to you. In saying that, please understand, I am not a doctor. This video is not here to prescribe or diagnose anything for you. It is simply here, hopefully, to empower you to ask more questions and take your own health into your own life and seek the answers that you are looking for and find that doctor that works for you specifically. So welcome, Ken. How are you?
Awesome. Hey, Becky. I'm so glad to be on the show.
I know we were saying earlier, because we were talking for a few minutes before going live, we coordinate and we look really good together.
I mean, this is like medical intuition at its very best.
Exactly.
Speak about what we were wearing.
We are in sync and connected. So I know that Emily is who connected us together. You came into our restaurant in Kirkwood. We sat with a group of people. We had some great, interesting conversations. Your book, The Healthy Brain Toolbox, was coming out, and you were kind enough to send me a copy of that. I've dove into it a little bit. But really what I want to talk to you about today is, what is neurology? Can you explain why somebody would be seeking a neurologist? What are some of the symptoms? What are some of the things that somebody is going to come to you for?
Oh, you bet. Well, first of all, I am a medical doctor. So I graduated from Emory Medical School in 1992. I then went on to do my postgraduate training. The technology has changed a little bit in what we call postgraduate training. Used to be internship, residency. Now they add words like PGY1, PGY2, that kind of thing. But basically, I did 1 year of adult internal medicine, followed by 3 years of neurology. So what is neurology? Neurology is a discipline that focuses on illnesses, conditions, diseases that affect the brain, the base of the brain, spinal cord, nerve roots. Those are the first segments of nerves coming off of the spinal cord, peripheral nerves, the connection between the nerves and the muscles, called the neuromuscular junction of the nervous system. So what do we deal with, right? We might see someone with Alzheimer's disease or some other memory loss disorder, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, migraine, fibromyalgia, Lou Gehrig's disease, seizure disorder. Those are a few examples of diseases that a neurologist might see. In the hospital, we see lots of strokes, not as much in the clinic. From a symptoms perspective, again, memory, pain, numbness, weakness, imbalance, headache, which we were talking about off air just a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a typical spectrum. And so someone might come in to me and say, you know, I've had this progression of symptoms. About a month ago, I started feeling weak. It started in my right arm, got worse and worse over time. You know, then I noticed that sensation in my arm wasn't normal, and maybe I had trouble seeing out of my right eye. You know, that might not be an unusual history, and that person needs a thorough history, physical exam. Maybe that's somebody who's presenting with multiple sclerosis.
And then can you explain, so we're clear on what the neurology part of it, how does the functional medicine part then play a role in the practice that you have?
Yeah, so now I've been in the space of practicing medicine, as I mentioned, since 1992 that I graduated from medical school. And think about what they teach doctors. Well, we can take a good history. Generally speaking, it's what we call the history of present illness. So it's from when your symptoms started and how did they develop. There's really much more to that story about who you are as a person, and I'll get to that in a second. We know how to exam. Hopefully as a doctor, we know order to get to the diagnosis. And in fact, for many years, neurologists were associated with a cliche, which is diagnose and adios, meaning we had few tools in our toolbox to actually treat diseases. Now that has improved to a degree, and as I mentioned off air, we were talking about migraine, which is a great example. There are lots of treatments for migraine, but if you have a migraine, and that affects at least 30 million Americans, so a lot of listeners out there probably have migraines, you know that for the most part, any of the treatments, even if they're helpful in the moment, or even if they reduce the frequency of migraine, they don't really address why you have migraine in the first place, right? And they really don't actually get rid of the migraine in the long run. You might have fewer attacks, but you know, if you stop your medicine, you still have the migraines. So Dr. Mark Hyman is a major thought leader in the functional medicine space, calls this the pill for the ill approach. And that's okay. You know, I always say we have a toolbox, which, shameless plug, that's the name of my book, right? So I say as a neurologist, my toolbox got bigger when I went into functional medicine, because I do appreciate the fact that sometimes medicines are either necessary or at least enormously helpful and appropriate at a given moment in time. I'm not against medicine, but
yeah,
we should strive. Yeah.
I was going to say that's one of the things that I think oftentimes is misunderstood. There is a time and a place for medication based off of who you are and what you're going through. I've talked about my own personal journey with depression and being diagnosed with bipolar, and hands down at the time, I needed medication. But I haven't been on it in a very, very long time. And it was not ever something that I knew I could be on for a long period of time. But I had to tap into my own personal toolbox and figure out how to maneuver through things to make myself more functioning in life. So one of the things in reading your book, briefly, you talk about, and I want to dive into this, you talk about how many people are walking around living inflamed. They are inflamed somewhere in their body, and the question is how long are they inflamed? How much damage is the inflammation doing to their body? Can you explain what inflammation within the body actually means?
Yes, so this gets at your question about the root causes of medicine and how functional medicine differs from conventional medicine. And we often use the image of a tree. When we think about the illnesses, the diseases, again, let's use migraine as an example, or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, out at the edges of that tree, a nice tree with a big round ball of leaves, right? So at the edges, there's your diseases. But trees, right, have roots, trunk, that branches, the branches have branches, and so forth. So if we move backwards from those leaves toward the trunk, what we're really saying is that there are some common root causes of illness. And the most important one is this idea of inflammation. We all know intuitively what inflammation is, because if you get a cut, you know, if you have a mosquito bite or a little light infection, you know, within a couple days, that area turns kind of red. It might raise up, it might even feel warm. Hopefully it doesn't get too much more serious than that, because for the most part, those mild things, we know we don't have to do much except care for that area, and it gets better on its own. And part of the reason it actually gets better is inflammation. So inflammation is a normal body process. It's part of the way the immune system behaves. It's part of the tissue repair and protection process. But when we talk about inflammation in the setting of chronic disease, what we're saying is that this inflammation comes on at a chemical and cellular level. So it's not necessarily inflammation you can see, like that raised area around a cut, but it comes on, and inappropriately, it does not turn off. It's inflammation after inflammation after inflammation. And the body reacts to these changes. And the ways in which the body reacts, a combination of genes plus environment, leads down the road or out to the edge of the tree again to disease. What we do in functional medicine is go down to the roots. So we ask, okay, first of all, we identify chronic inflammation. This can be measured in a number of different ways, and we can talk about that. But then ultimately, we want to dive down to those roots and understand factors like food that may trigger patterns of chronic inflammation and then ultimately disease. So we work down at the root cause level rather than just giving someone a medicine to suppress the symptoms or to suppress the disease enough that they can function, but the disease is still there.
Well, you brought it up. I didn't. You mentioned food. So
Guilty as charged.
I'll do, so because we're talking about oftentimes in functional medicine practices, I say oftentimes, I have not met a functional medicine doctor that doesn't deal with food as part of their healing practice. We're talking about the inflammation of food. What are some of the foods that you're usually eliminating from somebody's diet to help them with the inflammation part?
Yes, and I love that. And we do use the term anti-inflammatory diet. That's very helpful. That contrasts nicely with this, what I want to intuitively turn to, which is to simply say a healthy diet. And most of us feel like we know what a healthy diet is, but we don't always know what an anti-inflammatory diet is. So we do get rid of things like refined sugars and processed foods, dairy, gluten, soy, and corn. Those are the biggest ones. Now, sometimes we'll eliminate other foods, but that's usually after some testing. We do eliminate eggs temporarily, but we're happy to reintroduce them. Unfortunately, egg allergies are very common, but eggs are a great food. And so if we can reintroduce them, we definitely do.
Yeah, it was when we opened up our restaurant, heading in the whole direction of food as medicine kind of got developed and created based off our customers coming in and hearing the stories and identifying what was AIP, what was paleo. And we kind of morphed into those areas. And for the last year, Greg, my partner and chef, put the AIP hat on and created, our autoimmune protocol, our no tomato pasta sauce and our no tomato barbecue sauce, so that people can enjoy those flavors without having the issues that the tomatoes and some of those nightshades wind up pulling in. Let's talk about you personally a little bit. I know that you're a doctor and we go into all of these doctor questions, but you were a triathlete. You did triathlons.
Did triathlon.
Yeah, an avid biker. Do you still do anything like that today?
Well, I've dialed it down a little bit. I've recently taken out some of my favorite running shoes, which are called Vibram 5 Fingers. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Yeah, actually, I am.
I love just wearing them. I'll go anywhere, and usually it's a good conversation piece. But I actually like to go trail running in them. So it's kind of a lot of fun running through the woods with Vibrams on. I haven't done triathlon for a couple of years. I'm excited to perhaps get back into it. But yeah, I did triathlon for several years. I am a 3-time Ironman triathlon finisher, many half Ironmans, Olympic and sprint distance events as well, a couple of marathons as well. So I've definitely done my share of endurance sports.
Well, the reason that I bring that up is because in your book, you kind of talk about how that was a part of the beginning of you wanting to go into functional medicine, and you identified the brain. I want to say, for some reason, the brain maturity or the brain strengthening and the endurance to get through something like a triathlon, the mental preparation that you have to do to achieve this. And I bring that into perspective when it comes to health. It takes, when you're diagnosed with something that is oftentimes considered untreatable, it comes down to your mental preparation to get through whatever that challenge is. How do you see and find that same alignment in what it is that I'm saying there?
Becky, I have to apologize. There was
Did I cut
some
out?
buffering issue with Pros. So if you don't mind, just a thumbnail of your question, I would be very happy to answer.
So in health, you had explained in your book the mental preparation you have to take to achieve a triathlon. in being diagnosed with something that is oftentimes life-threatening. You're being told by a doctor that this is the end-all, be-all. There takes a mental side to dive in for the recovery part or just the living and support part. Do you find a similar comparison when it comes to an athlete versus somebody fighting for their health?
Yes, and I did get it this time. Unfortunately, it did freeze one more time, but I think I understand what you're saying. So, yes, there are definitely parallels, and for sure that's why I used it in the book. I think there are layers to this, right? So one is, how do you define yourself as a person? That's really important. Are you the disease? Does the disease have you? Who's in control here, right? And the minute you say, MS doesn't have me, I might have MS, but, MS doesn't have me, that's very important. Then there's the visualization, just like in any kind of race that you mentioned, get through something as grueling as the Ironman triathlon, 140.6 miles. You kind of have to know that you're going to cross the finish line in your heart, in your soul, in your mind. No matter what, whether I have to crawl, I am crossing that finish line. And so the determination that one has in addressing a health-related condition is also about visualization. And finally, I think having those experiences in the big endurance race or anything that challenges a person can ultimately be an experience of transformation. And really, that is what functional medicine is about. It's not just about what food we eat or a stress reduction practice or making sure you get 7 or 8 hours of sleep per night. It's about a total life transformation, about becoming something that's maybe a little bit different than we did this point. Because in my book and the language I use, I say we change our trajectory. And what does it take to change our trajectory? Yes, it does take a change in our relationship to food sometimes, but it takes a very deep inner soul or spiritual transformation of sorts to really become this new person that we visualize we can be as we cross the finish line. And they say, Becky Shoenig, you are an Iron Man. And you kind of have to apply that principle. And you say, I'm going to do this. And it may take me a while, but I'm going to cross that finish line. And I am, not going to be that person with MS anymore.
Yeah.
It is hugely healing.
You just spoke words that I will never hear, but I appreciate hearing them from you.
You are an Iron Man, come on.
I'm an Iron Man. It's just in a different form. Right now it's 3 restaurants, not running, swimming, and biking. Let's talk about, I mentioned it to you, I brought it up when you and I were talking. I had labeled it chronic vomiting syndrome, or CVS. You had used a terminology, and what was that again? When I had asked you, you had said pediatrics, or a lot of children have this illness.
Vomiting.
What was it called?
Cyclic, like cycle, CYCLIC,
yes.
Cyclic vomiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I asked you because my dad has this, but wasn't diagnosed until he was in his 40s with it, and it is typically found with children. What do you know about it? What can you explain about it? And how, somebody's listening that has that, what are some resources that they may have with that?
So first of all, under the broad umbrella of migraine, there are many ways in which this condition expresses itself. And although by word association, if I say migraine, you're going to automatically think headache, it turns out that sometimes migraine does not present with headache, or if headache is present, it's only a minor component. In children, this pattern of cyclic vomiting may be present. It's also thought that children tend to eventually mature into a pattern of more migraine are very sensitive to riding in cars. They tend to have a history of being very susceptible to motion sickness, which kind of overlaps with cyclic vomiting. There is something called the International Headache Society Classification System for Headache and Facial Pain, ICHD-3, and you can look that up on the internet. What you'll find is a fairly detailed outline of all the different subtypes of migraine. And of course, that's beyond the scope of our discussion, but I do want to emphasize really the very wide breadth of what migraine can be. And that it's more than a set of symptoms, that there really is a fairly objective set of criteria that we use to make the diagnosis. That being said, there's also something called late life migrainous equivalent, or accompaniment, not equivalent. So now don't shoot the messenger, because late life is defined as 40 or older. I'm 53, so I'm late life too, probably. I don't know how old. You're 29. Come on,
Yeah.
Now, this was actually described back in the 1980s by a gentleman who's kind of one of the patriarchs of neurology. His name was Miller Fisher. I'm assuming Dr. Fisher is no longer alive, but he's one of those guys that if you're real prominent, you get to have a disease named after you. So there is the Miller-Fisher syndrome. Has nothing to do with migraine. But anyway, Dr. Miller-Fisher wrote a couple of articles that were published in major medical journals. The second one was published in a journal called Stroke, very appropriately. He described over 200 cases. And in these individuals, among these individuals, headache was either absent entirely or
You froze up on my end, and I don't know if you can hear me.
Of the overt weakness or numbness on one or both sides of the body, slurred speech.
Ken, I'm gonna pause you for a second because you froze for a quick second.
Sure.
Could you go back to Dr. Fisher? You were talking about you froze up for just a few seconds there.
Sure. So Dr. Miller-Fisher, who's a kind of a patriarch of neurology, wrote a couple of articles. There's my cat deciding he wants to be in here.
Oh.
But
that was why we had to redo this, so the cat could have an appearance on the show.
My dog Rudy usually wanders in, but this computer is up on a table, so that's probably her name is Batgirl, and I actually wrote an article about her because she's a calico, and there's some very interesting genetics about calico cats. But anyway, it's actually published around the world, the article. But the question about Dr. Fisher and migraine is that he talked about this thing called late life migrainous accompaniment, and he described something like 205 cases in total combined between the two articles.
And for some reason, I guess for some reason, we're not supposed to hear any of that because every time you go to say it, it freezes up.
Oh, no.
That's okay. We're going to take it as a sign that is just simply not supposed to be said. So there's 200 and something different diagnoses of migraines. Is that what I was hearing correctly?
Oh, no, I didn't. No, there were over 200 cases. Described.
Okay.
Yes, and he subdivided his cases into groups, but what he basically said is, here's the take-home message, just in case we get cut off, is these individuals can present as if they will look like they're having a stroke, but they're not. So they might have weakness or numbness on one side of the body, slurred speech, visual change, the type of symptoms that you can see in stroke. But the key is that these attacks are of someone who comes in and says, I had multiple TIAs or mini
Are
when
you
in fact,
there?
stroke.
For
I
some
am
reason,
there.
for some reason, we keep freezing up at the end here. So why don't we go ahead and, because I don't want to keep asking questions and then it just keeps freezing up. It seems to be doing that all of a sudden. So let's go ahead and wrap up this episode. But I know you and I are going to join together again and have some more conversations because I really want to dive into this migraine component a little bit more. And then break apart maybe into two or three other topics that we can do a series of topics on. We can archive all of those for resources for people to reach out to you. Ken, I want to thank you for joining me. Can you hear me? Did I freeze up on you? You froze up again on me. I know that Emily posted the link to your book on here. Ken, can you hear me and see me? It's just going to freeze up. So, Ken, I want to thank you again for joining us today. Put your links in the comments below. If you were somebody that did comment in here, we promise we do respond back to those comments. If you have questions, private message somebody. We can always connect you and kind of go from there. Ken's practice is in Springfield, Missouri, so you are not far from him. If you are living here in St. Louis, he is definitely reachable. Ken, if you can hear me.
Gosh, I'm so sorry. Hey guys, go to this website, Healthy Brain Toolbox. I think you'll really enjoy my book. I'm so proud of it. I've worked really hard and it's got some great information. And I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be on your show.
Ken, thank you. And I don't know if you heard me earlier, but I'd like to get with you so we can break this into maybe 2 or 3 more segments. Hopefully when we don't freeze up and we can put a whole series together.
That'd be awesome. Glad to do it.
Sounds perfect. We will talk to you soon. Thank you again.
Bye-bye, folks. See you soon.